Hi, today we are going to present the topic that how COVID affect the economy in macro level. Starting from my side, I'm gonna discuss some problems that has been faced by the Australian government during COVID-19. As we all know that in COVID-19, not even in Australia, overall world suffer a lot. There were a lot of problems, financial and all that stuff. But with the time, we have covered on all that problem and everything is in routine now. But still, after 2 years, we are still facing some financial issues, not by Australian, but by every government. And today we're gonna discuss some of them that has been impact on Australian government with very hard hit. Without wasting any time, I'm gonna start from economic slump and joblessness. So when the COVID started, there were some issues that you cannot go to the job and you cannot go to the work. At that time, people have to stay at home. So just because of that, everything was shut down, and there was a economic slump just because of job, uh, job issues, unemployment, and shutter down of the businesses. So there were no job at that time. That was also one of the problem. And now moving to us next is fiscal deficit and debt. So government spending was increased in result of providing subsidies, just because government have to provide some financial aid to the public, so that they can stay at home and they can do their survival, they can do their bread and butter. So government paid a lot of funds. They have spent a lot of funds just to increase the capacity of a person, every person who is staying at home, and he can spend easily on their bread and butter. So they have faced fiscal deficit and debt as well. If we move towards the next, government has to deal with the rising public debt and expenditure budget. They also have to deal with the trade challenges, and supply chain balance become significant factor to be dealt with, just because all the markets are shut down. Every country has closed their border. There were no entry and exit in any country, so they have also suffered the supply chain and trade deficit. Trade challenges, we're going to discuss about the trade challenges. International trade, tourism, education, all and everything was in less demanded, just because there were no lifestyle, there were no normal routine of a public. So government has to deal with so much borrowing and spending and all, the less recovery of tax. That was some problem that has been faced by the Australian government. Moving towards the next, successful vacation programs. Vaccination program were necessary for reopening of economy and restoring the trust of consumer. People were hesitant to try the newly discovered vaccine, just because that was initially risk to everyone. Everyone is thinking that if they're gonna get the vaccination, what will be the result? So people were not very much comfortable with the vaccination. So that was also a hurdle faced by the Australian government. Health educators were called to educate the people on vaccination programs. So they have to hire them, they have to pay them as well. So that was also a financial issue that has been faced by the Australian government. Then fiscal policy, which entail rise government spending, lower taxes, and they, there are multiple things that affect with the government badly, just because they have to spend more and more, and they were not getting the taxes in return. Now moving towards the next, government spending may induce social welfare among people and improve infrastructure and educational. They also have fiscal policy offering financial assistance to firm. Overall fiscal policy enhance government expenditure. Now I'm gonna discuss about the efficiency and restriction. Overall, above steps taken by the government to raise GDP. That was a very hard steps that has been taken by the government, and the limitation and restriction were also there. These measure can be used temporarily, but in long run they have their own adverse effect. So everything has their return effect as well, as per the Newton's law. So they face the challenges for once, but also they have faced the return outcome by that. Now I'm moving towards the Avan Chaudhary, so he will explain the further slides, please.
Thank you, Suhail. The effect of change in wealth on consumer consumption function, which equals to CO plus BYD, where C is consumption, CO autonomous consumption, B marginal represent to consume, YD disposal income. This representation explores the impact of change in wealth on the consumption function. The consumption function represents the relationship between consumption and disposable income. Understanding how changes in wealth affect the consumption function help us analyze the dynamics of consumer spending behavior. As we know, wealth represents accumulated assets and financial resources. Increase in wealth leads to the increase in autonomous consumption, which is CO, as we know that, shifts the consumption function upward. An increase in wealth was a positive effect on the consumption function as individuals or household experiences a rise in wealth. Their autonomous consumption represented by CO increases. Autonomous consumption refers to the amount individuals spend when they have no disposal income. Consequently, the consumption function shifts upwards, indicative higher levels of consumption at every level of disposal income. As we move further, wealth represents accumulated assets and financial resources, which decreases in wealth leads to decrease in autonomous consumption and shifts the consumption function downwards. Conversely, a decrease in wealth has a negative impact on consumption function. When individuals or households experience a decline in wealth, their autonomous consumption represented by CO decreases. This reduction in autonomous consumption leads to a downward shift in the consumption function. Consequently, at every level of disposable income, there is a decrease in consumption. As
Thank
we
you.
move forward, the consumption function describes the relationship between consumption and disposal income. Changes in wealth have an impact on the autonomous consumption, compound of the function, and moreover, an increase in wealth leads to an upward shift in the consumption function, while otherwise decrease in wealth result in a downward shift. Now further we go, the effect changes in expected future income on the consumption function, which will be explained by Gagandeep.
Thank you, Avan.
Thank you.
So now we are discussing about the effect of change in expected future income on the consumption function. As we know, consumption function is equal to autonomous for consumption plus marginal propensity to consume into disposable income. As expected future influences consumer spending decision, as increase in the expected future income raises disposable income, resulting in a shift of the consumption function upwards. And on the other side, a decrease in the expected future income lowers disposable income, which leads to a downward shift in the consumption function. So moving to the next slide, we will discuss about the effect of changes in a real interest rate on the consumption function. Basically, the real interest rate impacts the borrowing cost and saving returns, influencing disposable income. Firstly, an increase in the real interest rate reduces disposable income and causes a downward shift in the consumption function. As on the other side, if there is a decrease in the real interest rate, raises the disposable income and leads to an upward shift in the consumption function. So moving to the next slide. Here we are discussing about the impacts of COVID-19 lockdown and economic reopening on consumption. Firstly, due to lockdown, there is a decline in spending on travel, services, restaurants, and recreation spending, and shift in household consumption to goods like food, furnishing, and alcohol. And other one is like gradual reopening, recovery in household consumption or discretionary services resume. There is an increase in supply and demand for the non-essential goods and services. So basically, COVID affected consumer spending pattern with a shift towards essential goods and services and increased online purchases. And as the economy reopened and travel restrictions eased, household consumption gradually recovered and demand for the discretionary services resumed. The reopening of international borders further boosted consumption, leading to a rebound in spending on travel and tourism related services.
Thank you so much, Gagan. Thank you for your time.
Discussing the topic of the impact of COVID-19 lockdown and economic reopening consumption. COVID-19 lockdown declined spending, travel services, and recreation. Shift goods like food and furnishing and alcohol. Reopening, recovery in household consumption and services resumed. Supply and demand non-essential goods and services increased. And the second topic, crowding out in understanding the concept. Crowding out phenomena is economic. Increased government spending leads to decrease in private sector investment and the public sector expansion and economic performance. And the third topic is implication of crowding out. First one is a private sector investment and reduce investment by business and negatively impact of the productivity and economic growth. The second implication of the public sector, increased government spending may not always be allocated efficiently. And the third one is a public sector expansion and expansion of the economic performance. And the fourth one is a limitation of crowding out in recent decades. Crowding out a phenomena economic and limitation decades for the sector investment, capital global market limitation potential of crowding out in recent decades. And the last one is the factor limitation, the potential of for crowding out. Global market and the expand 21st century, facilitating a movement of capital across borders, simple model of crowding out and foreign saving. With international capital mobility, countries' foreign saving and government spending reduced and domestic sources. And the last one is a factor limitation, the potential for crowding out and the funding sources by issuing bond assessing international financial market and burden of domestic private sector investment limiting and the crowding of effect. Thank you.